people that they haven't been playing against for months, years.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think they're a very strong group, and obviously it could be a little bit of both. I mean, the inexperience of the O line, but also the really strong up front. And you mentioned Thomas Bronson earlier being out. He'd hurt his knee a couple of weeks ago, and initially they were expecting him to be out. They called it maybe 4 to 6 weeks, and he healed up a lot faster than expected in a week and a half, and he was actually back on the practice field yesterday. So
Okay,
he is
good.
he's back out there. He's practicing with him, and he is expected to start. And from everything that I've seen, I'd be very surprised if his primary backup wasn't Greg Millhouse. He looked, as you said, very, very sharp. He was impressive at FanFest. He was in the backfield. He had a couple tackles for loss. He forced a fumble. He was all over the field. And the fumble that he forced was actually on a fellow fellow freshman wide receiver Malachi Jones, about 15 yards down from the line of scrimmage. So he can move too. He's a really strong athlete. It's interesting how it happens sometimes that a position like D tackle that coming into the season was one of the biggest question marks and something a lot of fans are worrying about could end up being a strength for us. There will be some growing pains with a true freshman and a redshirt freshman, but they are both really they both have gotten very, very high praise and good reviews from the coaching staff, and both have great size. They're both 6'3". I believe Bronson's about 290 and Millhouse is about 280, but the 6'3", big frames, long arms, and there will be some growing pains early, but with both these guys having 4 years left to go, and we didn't even really see anything out of a freshman that was actually more highly touted than Greg Millhouse and Darian Small. So we've got 3 guys that have 4 years left to play in the system at D tackle, and I think that's a position that went very quickly from being, a question mark to one that we've got depth, and, assuming we don't, really get bit by the injury bug this year, that D tackle position could end up being a strength, because Millhouse looked great, and if Bronson's established himself as the starter and looked significantly better than him throughout practice, I'm really excited to see what he can do.
Yeah, definitely. And like you and I both said several times so far, they just put a ton of pressure on the quarterback. So I'm excited to see what kind of pressure we can get on other teams, not just our own team.
Yeah.
And with that pressure, obviously, that's going to benefit our linebacking core, which is, I don't think it's even up for argument. That's probably our strongest point on defense. So, Mike, how did the linebackers look during the scrimmage?
Well, I mean, going into the scrimmage, you had your known commodities there at linebacker. Jeremy Kimbrough and Brandon Greer, and they looked just like you'd expect that they looked. Kimbrough had 7 tackles and a tackle for loss. Greer had 6 tackles and a tackle for loss, and that was with them rotating in and out and giving a lot more time to the backups than they normally would. So they look sharp. They're exactly what you'd expect out of an all-conference and all-American type player. Behind them, a guy that I think will give us some good depth at that position is sophomore Jamal Ware. He was primarily a special teams player last year. He was all over the field. He had 3 tackles for loss. He had 2 sacks. He had good penetration, and he's just one of those kids you can tell watching him play. He's got really good instincts. So he's a guy that bodes well for the future, and also is going to give us some depth behind kind of the 2 stars there, and Kimbrough and Greer. And then another, he's not your, I guess, a typical linebacker, but you had Deuce Robinson, who was making the adjustment to that bandit position. He looked good. You can tell he's still making the adjustment, but he looked strong. He pressured the quarterback. He made his way into the backfield a handful of occasions. Ended up with 3 tackles, a sack, a forced fumble. So he was very active. He's still acclimating to the position. You can tell that he's still not as comfortable, which is to be expected, but he's not as comfortable in, kind of dropping back pass coverage that, some of those responsibilities that he really was not accustomed to having at all when he had his hand on the ground as a defensive lineman. But his athletic ability is off the chart. I mean, at 6'3", 250, he can move. He can make tackles in the open field. He's a very good player, and I think it's only going to be a matter of time before he adjusts fully to the new position. And based on the comments from Coach Jones, his primary competition is going to be a true freshman, Greg Hall, who, in terms of frame, is not that different from Robinson. He's a little bit lighter, 6'3", 235, but he is also a very, very athletic kid, still learning the position himself. He is, only been in the program for a couple of months, whereas Deuce Robinson, even though he didn't play Bandit, was in the defense last season, primarily playing defensive end. But Greg Hall's got another guy with good instincts, that is apparently, his primary competition at this point. I would be pretty surprised if anybody other than Robinson won that starting spot. I mean, Hall's going to be there for depth, but given the experience and a little bit better size and more familiarity with the defense and with the coaches, I think that Robinson's going to lock down that Bandit spot. And once he gets a little bit of game time under his belt to adjust to the responsibilities that come along with kind of being that linebacker hybrid, I think he's going to be a real force in that position when he's got the kind of size and strength that he does, and being able to to be a stand-up linebacker and get his momentum going towards the line of scrimmage. I think he's going to be a load for any offensive tackle we see to block.
Yeah, I mean, he's exactly what you said. He's just a load. He's got the size of a defensive line, but the speed of a linebacker. So if he can get his instincts and learn the position, he's going to be, I have no doubt in my mind, he'll be at least an all-conference player, not necessarily this year, but by the time he's done, and I would not be surprised one bit if he turns out to be an All-American playing that Bandit spot. And one thing that kind of was interesting to me is Jamal Ware, who you just talked about earlier about backing up Kimbrough and Greer. He was actually penciled in as the backup for Reiser in the Bandit position. And I guess this just kind of plays along with what we were talking about earlier. We actually have depth at the D-line that we didn't think we had. And so because of that, we were able to move Deuce Robinson to the Bandit, and then now Jamal Ware, who's significantly smaller. He's 6'1", 215. So he's significantly smaller, and having him at the linebacker position as opposed to the Bandit, it bodes better for both him and Deuce Robinson. So I'm excited to have that depth on the D-line to be able to push Deuce Robinson out to the Bandit and have Jamal Ware play where he should be playing, as opposed to putting him in a position just because we needed somebody there.
Mm-hmm. I definitely agree. I think that Jamal Ware probably is a little more well suited in terms of his size, his skill set to be a linebacker, and I think the emergence of Greg Hall as a true freshman is gonna help us both at the Bandit spot, and it's also going to help us in terms of linebackers. And another true freshman that I was pretty impressed with at the at FanFest was Tayshawn Singleton, and he's another guy that I'm not sure if they know for sure whether he's going to be more of a defensive end or whether he's going to be kind of a linebacker Bandit type position himself. But he was very impressive. He's another guy similar in build to what you get with Greg Hall and with James Robinson. He's a little bigger. He's almost exactly, I believe, James Robinson's size. He's 6'3", 245, 250, and he also moves well. I don't think he's quite as quick and athletic as Robinson, and for that reason, I saw him at the scrimmage more often with his hand in the ground than as a stand-up linebacker. But he's another impressive guy, and it still remains to be seen how much time he's going to get this year. But he had 4 tackles at the scrimmage, and he was very active. He got in the backfield. He was able to run down the running back on a couple different occasions. And whether or not he makes a huge impact this year, he's just yet another guy that was very, very impressive out of this recruiting class. And even for looking to the future, I think we've got depth for years to come in the front seven.
Yeah, definitely. And the thing I love about our defense is we've got a very young secondary. Obviously, we have Demetrius McCray, who obviously started the scrimmage, and on the other side we had Joel Ross, who I believe is a redshirt freshman. So we've got a very young squad there, but they're all very good. Um, Middleton, who we talked about earlier, he started at the star position, and then Patrick Blaylock and Troy Sanders, who both have years of starting experience. Both man the safety spots. And other than the first play of scrimmage when that we talked about when Price got behind the zone and beat them for the touchdown, they looked very solid. They looked to be in position most of the time. And the thing that I saw that I thought was very interesting was there just seemed to be a lot more communication on the field. Last year it seemed to be, and it was expected just because we had I believe we had two defensive backs playing because of injuries who had never played the position before, so the communication wasn't there as well as it is this year, and so I think that's going to play a huge part in the secondary is having that communication and not getting that blown coverage. Um, and then, like I said, we're very young. We had redshirt freshman Henry Barnes, who led the team in the scrimmage in 9 tackles, and then we also have Patrick Blaylock, who picked up 5 tackles. Blaylock again we mentioned this before. He's the guy who famously picked up his scholarship and a starting role because he was able to block 2 punts in one game from special teams.
Mm-hmm.
And then Jerry Moore saw his effort and his passion and just how he's putting everything into it and truly giving his all, and he offered him a scholarship. And Blaylock he really hasn't dropped off since getting that scholarship. So that's good to see that he's still putting up good numbers and playing well. And I say that, and I'm going to segue into what I thought was the most intriguing play of the day. Included Patrick Blaylock, and unfortunately he was on the wrong end of it, but he picked up a fumble and was going for what seemed to be a sure touchdown. He made one or two guys miss on the way, and then out of nowhere, the speedy transfer from Oregon to Coy Sumler came in and knocked him out of bounds around the 5-yard line. Nobody saw Sumler coming at all, and so both sides of the ball ran to Sumler and congratulated him, and what I liked about it is he had the body language of, well, isn't that what I was supposed to do? Why are you congratulating me? Which I think is really good, and I think we got a good one in Sumler, although we didn't see him much on the offensive side. Mike, what did you see of him?
Well, I mean, from a purely athletic standpoint, I mean, you're you're right. That was one of the most impressive plays of the day. I mean, Blaylock he's not necessarily known as a speed guy, but I mean, he's a safety, he's a defensive back. He's not slow by any stretch, and someone was a good solid 20 yards behind him and ran him down from behind and knocked him out of bounds at the 5-yard line or inside the 5. And that kind of speed, you just can't teach that. I mean, it was, he, even though that was unfortunately the only chance that he really had to showcase his speed during the scrimmage, it was very impressive. And, just in that one play, he showed what he can do for this team. He's got some serious jets, and he is the fastest guy on the field every time he's out there. From an offensive standpoint, he had pretty modest stats, only 3 catches of 15 yards. They returned both one kickoff and 1 punt. Neither one of them had really big gains, but we do kind of, it's very easy for a kid coming from a big time program like Oregon. It was 4 stars out of high school, and runs that blazing 4.24 40 time. It's really easy to heap big expectations on him early, but we need to keep in mind that the scrimmage at FanFest was the first time he had played in pads since he's come to Appalachian. Because of the NCAA rule, had to come and practice in shells for 2 days before he was able to put on full pads, and that third day just happened to be FanFest. So not only was it the first time that we've been able to see him, it was the first time the coaches were able to see him. He hadn't even practiced in full pads before that day, so he's still learning the playbook. He's still getting acclimated. I don't necessarily know that I'm expecting him to get a ton of touches and make a huge impact early in the season, but I think once he gets in there, gets some reps, kind of builds that rapport with Jamal Jackson, and they kind of get to know each other a little bit better, know their tendencies. I think he is going to be a serious asset for us, and as me and you and everybody has talked about, he's got speed that you just can't teach. So I was very, very impressed with his athletic ability, and I think it's only a matter of time before he, kind of gets comfortable in the